Hey everyone, welcome to Soul Cafe. We're really glad that you're here. And Aaron, welcome from Atlanta. I mean, how's Atlanta? You said it didn't rain there today.
It did rain here tonight. No, it's about 72 and a little overcast, but it was not too bad. Yeah.
Just poured here today. Absolutely poured. 55, rainy, kind of one of those, you want to sleep days. But
Yeah.
anyway, couldn't.
Spring showers, spring May flowers.
Right, and my grass is growing, so
Yeah.
I guess that's good. I
the
think I
allergies
might have to mow. Oh, my allergies are the worst I've ever had. My eyes have been waking me up in the middle of the night.
Oh,
So look, see how red they are? I mean,
Yeah.
it's bad.
all right.
It really is.
Yeah, I think
But-
I'm getting new allergies here, so that's fine.
Well, so supposedly, if you move to a new place you've never lived before, and you get the flora and fauna there, you got 7 years. So it takes 7 years for you to build up your maximal response to
Now, I
those
did live
particular
here
elements.
for 3 years, but in the late 90s. So I'm not sure it would have.
Well, that might set you back a ways. I don't know.
Yeah. That's
But yeah, for me, I've lived here 19, and plus I didn't go that far. I mean, I've
Yeah.
always lived close to here. So
Yeah.
I think if I came down there, I might, I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows?
They say it's the worst allergy year down here this year.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
it's bad. It's the worst I've ever had here. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I mean, but
And then you get the cicadas coming. Ooh, you guys are getting into a doozy this summer.
were you here at 19?
Yeah, it was the year we
17
bought-
years ago when they came?
2004, we bought our house in Falls Church, not Falls Church City, but Falls Church, Fairfax County. It was the year we bought our house. We got engaged, and the house, I mean, I'll never forget, and still took me to go see it. I thought, there's no way I can live here. He goes, Aaron, all those carcasses will be gone. And they were just like coating the doors.
Oh, I know. It was crazy.
It was
I think people who haven't been, I talked about it Sunday, as you may or may not know,
Yeah.
and I think people who haven't been here,
They have no idea.
there's no preparation for it. I mean,
So
we were blown away,
We did a
and
movie
people
premiere
wrote me and
that
said
week.
the rat thing was a lie, right? And I sent them an article from the Washington Post. No, it's
No,
not a
that's
lie.
true.
There's plenty of stuff for things to eat.
It's so gross. We did a movie premiere that year for Harry Potter down in Silver Spring. We had the red carpet out, and we literally had to pay people who just every couple of minutes would go sweep the carpet. It was disgusting. People, if you're listening, and you've never lived there through this.
So okay, so I'm going to
Very
confess. I think it's kind of cool.
Oh, yuck.
Debbie's like you. She hates it.
Have you ever eaten one?
She's like, this is, yeah. Have we? Yeah. I said Sunday. We have. So
Oh,
17 years ago, we did a Soul Cafe. This was in like, so we did a Soul Cafe, then we quit Soul Cafe, then we started it again. You and I started it again. So in the early years of Soul Cafe, we had a cicada episode
oh.
of Soul Cafe. And we had a scientist come in and talk about cicadas. And yeah, it was fun.
All right.
And we had Doug Cook make cicadas of various sorts. So he basted some in butter and roasted them in a pan, and then he chocolate coated some. And I can't remember the other recipes, but there were like, I invited people from the audience who were willing,
Ugh.
and we all came up there and we ate them. Well, the ones in the pan tasted kind of like peanuts or something. Honestly, they taste like nuts. I mean, so.
It's the texture that would bother me.
I didn't think they were bad. I mean, you do know that there are insect parts in a lot of food you eat.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So a lot of processed food has.
Rather not know about it.
It does. You check it out. It has.
I know.
I mean, insects are there. You know, it's just like you eat cow and you eat pig and you eat chicken.
Yeah.
What's the difference, right?
Yeah. Sure.
So anyway, they were pretty good, I thought. And I thought the whole thing was interesting, except the one thing that bugs me actually is not the carcasses, not all the bugs. That's no big deal. That if they came in my house, I guess I'd feel differently. It's the noise at night.
So crazy. So loud.
It is so loud.
So
And
loud.
I have to have a perfect, I am like a princess. Debbie calls it she says I'm the princess and the pea. You
Me
know that
too.
story?
That's what Cyril calls
Okay.
me.
So, oh, really? So,
Yes.
I've got to have I've got to have
lighting.
like the perfect environment. And so, I say that you need cool, dark,
Yeah.
and quiet.
Yeah.
Those are your things.
Yeah, white noise kills me. I can't stand the sound.
I don't mind white noise. It's the stuff I'm not used to, like the roaring. Those cicadas just, it just. So it takes me a few nights to get used to that.
Yeah.
But other than that, I kind of find it fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit
I think it's
fascinating. Look at
interesting.
the map to make sure that because there is a part of Georgia that's going to get them, but it's not where we are. So I was like,
No, you're not in the region. You do have a different brood, but it's not like here.
yeah,
I think
there's a little bit of brood X right at the tip of Georgia. But
well, you can go up there just to feel
no thanks.
like, because I know you miss us. I know you do.
I do miss you guys, but I don't miss the cicadas.
We miss you too. Well, I miss you, and I would miss the cicadas. But anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
So, so tonight you have a pretty intriguing topic with regard to our current moment. So, radicalization.
Yeah, just identity, radicalization, in groups, out groups, just like the whole nature of how people are identifying themselves these days and how it's affecting the way in which we're addressing the bigger issues in society. So yeah, it was just on my heart from a few of the incidents that have just happened over the last week and a half. And our friend Casey Miner has been talking about it for probably since we started Soul Cafe.
Oh yeah, for sure. In this show.
And I'm just glad that I finally.
No, I think this is the right moment, because we always think that somebody else can be radicalized, but not people like us. It's not true. Anybody can be. And then his friend, I guess, Mike McCabe. So, we'll bring them in after we bring in Aaron.
Yeah.
So Aaron's going to do 2 songs tonight. So should we bring him in? Do you think?
Yeah, let's bring him in. I think you said he was going to do one. Now you're
he told
behind
us
the scenes going, wait a minute, I thought you said only one.
you may have been talking to someone else when that happened. He's going to do 2 tonight. Yeah. No, maybe you're right. Did he say
I
one?
think you said one, and then you said save the other one for.
I think you're right. I did. I
Right.
said save the other one for 3 weeks from now, because while people are watching, before they tune us out, we'll be off for the next 2 weeks, Holy Week and the week after. So Aaron and I are both out the week after, and so we're going to take 2 weeks off, which is what we used to do back in the day when there weren't, if there were dinners, we did this, and if there weren't, there weren't. But you realize that for like starting this week right now, you and I, other than maybe 4 weeks, we've been on the entire year.
On the entire year.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
And
it's a lot, guys.
yeah, it's been a lot, but it's been fun. And in the early days, people needed it. And by the way, just so people don't ask me and email me, I am sitting in the same space. I just removed I took out the tent. I was tired of working down here in the tent, and so the picture of DC is right there.
Yeah.
Where it used to be back in the day.
I'm in a new abode. I'm in a new house. So you see him.
And Aaron's in yet another
And outside.
place. Are you outside?
I am. We're at the beach this week.
Oh, you are.
You're in Charleston, right?
We're in Edisto Beach down in South Carolina. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. In fact, I was like so unplugged, sort of zoned out. Simon and I paddled over to an island like across the bay from here.
Yeah.
And then I looked down at my phone. What's that?
Kayak?
Kayak, yeah.
Yeah, because that's what we do down at my place. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It was beautiful.
That's awesome.
So I looked at my phone, and I think it was like 5:50, and I was like, oh, it's getting a little close to time there. I probably better head back.
Well, but you were early jumping in today, and I got to tell you, your sound down there at Edisto is awesome.
Yeah.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah.
well, last week I realized that this microphone, when you flip me back after coming out of the waiting room or whatever, that it turns off the original sound, and so it's just a regular microphone. So
You got to turn it back on.
Hopefully I figured that thing out.
Oh, you sound good. All right, what are you gonna sing?
Cool. So I heard one of my favorite guitarists, Trey Hensley, who is not particularly famous outside of just like flat-pecking bluegrass circles. He did a version of a Patty Griffin song called Trapeze. So I was inspired, so I figured I'd play that one.
All right, carried it away.
Got it. Little pink dress hanging by her knees, just overhead on the old trapeze. In the old tent tonight, the spotlight's going round. One of these nights, the old girl's going down. Hallelujah, the old girl's going down. She started with us on the back of a horse, just 17 and already divorced. She took to the air with the greatest of ease, like she was born to be gliding on the old trapeze. Some people don't care if they live or they die. Some people want to know what it feels like to fly. They gather their courage and they give it a try. Some guy broke her heart, and how her heart it did ache. So she went to the tent of the Lady of the Snakes, who gave her a potion, and she drank it in. After that, her heart never ached again. After that, her heart never ached again. Some people don't care if they live or they die. Some people want to know what it feels like to fly. They gather their courage time going by. Little pink dress hanging by her knees, just overhead on the old trapeze. In the old tent tonight, the spotlight's going round. One of these nights, the old girl's going down. One of these nights, the old girl's going down. One of these nights, the old girl's going down. One of these nights, the old girl's going down. Hallelujah.
Nice, man. Hey, you got to tell me, what is that song about?
It's kind of dark. I think it's you know.
Oh, I wasn't expecting dark, but
no. You know the Brad Paisley song with it's called Whiskey Lullaby. I'm trying to remember. Alison
I do know
Krauss.
that song. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that.
Okay.
Kinda.
All right.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
So for those,
but
who...
I thought it was beautiful, especially the end there, how it kind of crescendos.
Yeah, it's cool.
Really nice.
Yeah, I like it. So I'm going to guess it's about 63, 64 degrees there.
Right now it's actually a little over 70.
Is it?
Oh,
well,
yeah.
Then
I
that,
don't know, you have a thermometer in the
and that thermometer over your head really needs to be fixed.
Oh, yeah. Like nothing around here really works. There's a tide clock inside that's been saying it's high tide the entire time we've here. So
You can fix that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know even how to do that. Put a new battery in it, I guess.
Well, man, hey, it's been great to see you. Thanks for being on your. I guess this is vacation for you.
It is, yeah. Well, the kids are still in school, but I just decided to take the week off. I was going to kind of work remotely, but
Good for you.
Yeah, it didn't happen.
Yeah, needed the chill time, and my gosh, it's great. I
Well,
sat
thanks.
out on the beach today, and we fished for hours, caught 2 little tiny fish.
That's what you catch in the surf.
Yeah.
It always has been. Nothing's changed since I was a kid. Yeah, but thanks for being with us. Love you, man. Take care.
Love you too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy.
All right, so let's bring in our guests. So we'll bring in Casey first because everybody knows Casey Minor. And
Casey Minor.
he says people don't know what he does. I know what he does. Do you?
Well, I think they know what he does, but I don't know that a lot of people knew that this particular area of discussion was something.
Yeah, the last few years, this has been his bit.
Yeah.
So be sure you unmute, Casey, so we can hear you. Good to see you, man.
Good evening. How are you?
Good to see you.
You
So
too.
what do you want to talk about tonight?
So I guess we're going to have a conversation talking about identity and belonging and maybe some trends that we're seeing, some things that have happened. And, hopefully we can have an honest discussion about, what it looks like for us, in the church in response, but maybe some around us.
Yeah.
And and kind of where it goes from there.
Yeah.
All right. So you're bringing a friend of yours with you, which is good.
Yep.
And so I did, so you can, why don't you introduce Mike?
Yeah,
Could you
sure.
do that? Yeah.
Yep. So being in the military, I have my military role, had my assignments, but also the past few years, I've had the opportunity to really work in different ways that have allowed me to broaden my doctoral research on youth development. And I did a fellowship at USAID a few years ago. and I worked with some violent extremism. And Mike is the youth coordinator at USAID, responsible for integrating youth perspectives, youth programming across the entire agency at all the missions around the world, and strategic policy to make sure that they are included in everybody's understanding, what is going on and how to properly address and include youth. As we look at holistically around the globe, we have the youth bulge, the largest youth population we've ever had. And so what are we doing?
The youth goes to 29, right? If that's the definition where you're.
Yeah, internationally.
29.
We don't necessarily think about that in the US, but
Sure.
Everybody else, they do. It's true.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yep.
Yep. So so him and I have talked a lot, and so when we talked with Aaron, we thought it'd be perfect for him to be able to come in, not just with his international experience and development, but also some of the things that are going on recently in identity and belonging.
Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Great
Yeah.
to be here.
Well, Jim and I always love to surprise Jim with what our topics are going to be. So,
When you do, it's fine.
I know. So I figured out. So obviously as I mentioned in the preamble here that we were talking about, there's a lot of news, a couple shootings this week or last week and this week. And just a lot. I think what I've been really struggling with, how much is even in the time when we're needing to come together to identify what's wrong and how do we allyship and things like this, even in that our language feels separate and identified by groups still. And so I've just been mulling it over and in my head trying to figure out, how do we have this discussion around identity, around what causes people to create for themselves in groups, out groups, what causes them to turn to violence or extremism in those beliefs, and that it exists across every type of any human being can be radicalized or perceive themselves to be in with someone else being out. So as I mentioned, Casey had been talking about this topic for quite some time, and I'm just glad I remembered it finally to say, Casey, remember that time? Will you come, please?
No, the time is right. And Aaron, if you've noticed, there's a certain bias. So we have an evangelical kid who grew up in an evangelical tradition, and he goes and takes out these people who are his supposed temptation. Nobody's talking about radicalization. If he were Islamic instead of Christian, they would be, which is fascinating to me. It's really, because I'm pretty sure if you go to 3 clubs and you shoot 8 people, or you shoot a lot of people and kill 8 people, there's something radical going on.
Right.
And then we have a kid in Colorado, Boulder, who he's Syrian by background and he is Muslim. However, there doesn't seem to be a motive, a religious motive or a racial motive in what he did. He goes in and shoots up a grocery store, and nobody is talking about radicalization. But I'm pretty sure that's pretty radical if you walk into a grocery store and you light people up. So isn't it all the same thing? And that's one of the things I want to ask you guys. If somebody is pushed to the point of feeling so outside that they do something like this, aren't we talking about the same phenomena, no matter whether a person is black, white, green, purple, or a person is of a particular faith? Aren't we talking about the same things at play? And I'm curious. I really am just asking that out of curiosity.
Yeah. Let me outline a couple of things, and then Mike, if it's okay, you can jump in because you're going to have some great examples. So, thinking about identity, right? All of us, as we look to how we identify, most of the time it's multi-layers. We're thinking about different things. We identify differently, but we have these insecurities, right? So, in a lot of the studies, I can like Katy Perry, Steve Perry from Journey, President Obama, Lauren Daigle, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, Hamilton, if you've watched Hamilton, Robin Williams in particular, their entire life is this search, this figuring out who they are, what is their identity, and then where do they belong? What is this belonging piece of it that they don't feel like they do? And so as this transcends into radicalization, I wanted to go over some of the signs, because I think if we can take a step back, we normally think of radicalization and extremists abroad around the world. But I think in this past year or two, we have to take a hard look internally in the US as well. So think about some of these things really quick. Isolating themselves, narrowing relationships, talking as though from a script, whether it's true or not, unwillingness to or inability to explain their views, a sudden disrespectful attitude towards others, increased levels of anger, increased secretiveness, especially around internet use, recruiting others to become part of a group, spreading messages and hatred seen here in the US with that. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, our starting place and whatever I say, just to put in that little clarification, while I work at USAID and Casey works at DOD, our comments aren't representative of our organizations, but more from our own experience. And, for me, I always think about like, when we take a look at any country we're working in and where that violence is coming from, whether it's the US or Syria or El Salvador, we do what we call a driver's analysis. What's driving certain types of behavior that are driving people to join a gang or to join a extremist group, whether that is a white extremist group or a jihadist group or any type of group. And a lot of those things, as Casey said, come back to those groups knowing how to draw upon insecurities of people. And, Jim, you started off by giving kind of two very dramatic examples of this past week. The young man in Colorado, the little we do know of him was the impact of bullying on him and the lack of social contact. And that bullying and lack of social contact made him very susceptible. And then you make easy access to, a means of carrying out an atrocity. That's a bad combination. So like, how do we build those senses of meaningful relationship so people feel that they have an outlet for their frustrations or what's going on with their own mental health? I mean, we have our spiritual health, we have our physical health. We have to always say we have our mental health too, all of us. We're dealing in a time in America where America and globally, we have the highest levels of mental health manifestations we've ever seen, according to the World Health Organization. We all need to do that work to support each other and to invest in our own health in that way. And then there's this other side of it, which is grievances. So whether that grievance comes from perceived or real, having been bullied, or in many countries where we work, it's often security forces that will have carried out grievances against a certain ethnic or racial group or religious group, and that triggers off that narrative that is shared with them, whether it's by a relative or a group of like-minded identity that they connect to, and that's where then that common narrative is the fear of the other and that we need to stay together. When I was working in Central America with the gangs, it was pretty obvious why kids join gangs. And let's be clear, only about 1 to 2% of young people join gangs in Central America. You think of it as everybody's in a gang. It's 1 to 2% of young people. But where are those 1 to 2%? They're in communities where when you walk outside and try and go to school, you are constantly being asked, you either join us or you're a victim of us. We're going to extort you, we're going to threaten you physically, sexually, otherwise. And so people join because they're looking for a common set of safety, purpose, meaning, belonging. Those are the exact same drivers of good youth development programs. So when we look at, we've done a lot of research on what works on effective youth programs and building thriving youth and resilience. And those 7 features are, those skills for learning and education for a meaningful job, a caring adult or mentor, a safe space in the non-school hours, the access to youth-friendly services and to be of purpose. So being a change maker in your community. And when you look at those are the exact same things that some of the extremist groups or gangs draw upon. They're looking at young people who are not having any of those things around them, and they provide that sense of belonging a mentor, purpose, power. And so we have to look at that as we're trying to develop programs to connect those kids who might fall one way or the other. And that's a lot of what we try and do. We just try and make sure we're working with community groups to give that better path there. So
Would that 1 to 2% hold true across the board in almost every culture, every nation?
It's actually, yeah, it's
Yeah.
surprisingly true. You look at Iraq and, percentage of people involved in extremist groups or others. It's, I used to show this slide when I was in Central America to businessmen. I said, what percentage of the population here has been involved in a gang? And it showed 100 faces of gang members. And I said, is it 32%, 16%, 8%, or less than 1%? They all thought it was 16 or 32%. It was less than 1%.
Mm-hmm. And that would be true in the United States. It would be true anywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting.
I had a question about the mental health aspect, and when you were talking about it, it brought it up for me because of some of the time that I've spent inside the prisons, not serving a sentence, but my work inside prisons, and one of, I think, the common misconceptions around mental health for a lot of people, and I think this is probably another sort of identity issue for folks, is that when someone commits an act of violence, people chalk that up to literally like sociopathic behavior, right? Which in the prison world, maybe there's 1% of the criminals that are in there that are truly sociopathic. Most of them have had other types of trauma or things that have led to the violent behavior. And sometimes when we chalk things up to quote unquote mental health, it almost gives people an escape route. So for instance, that's why people can look at the entire prison population as an example and not think they're redeemable, because they're clearly sociopathic or they're crazy, right? And that's not, they might have had depression, they might have had anxiety, they might have had other types of mental health issues. So I'm just curious, when you're looking at children or adults who are going through some of these processes and becoming radicalized or being led even by their own selves into extreme or violent acts, how do we help people understand the impact of various types of mental health in combination with other things? Like, how do we help people identify a little bit more strongly with what mental health really is, as opposed to
that's a great question. And one of the biggest problems that we've had is that mental health was often referred to as mental illness for so long, and we kind of demonized being able to talk about it. It's interesting in this generation. One of my great passions in life is coaching. So, we just moved from Maryfield down to downtown DC 2 weeks ago. But when I wasn't living in Latin America, I was coaching basketball and soccer in Vienna. And I remember talking with my girls' high school basketball team a few years ago, and they were talking that between that team, they knew 9 other kids in their school, I won't mention which school it was, that were considering suicide at that moment. And, and all of them would have said, we live with an incredibly high level of stress. Often, and I said, what's driving that? And they said, this unbearable sense of needing to achieve at a certain level to live up to expectations of parents or whoever that is, or of our peers. All over the world, we've too often not dealt with the issue of stigma of talking about mental health. And so mental health is just part of good health. It's whether it's physical or spiritual or mental health. So then there's this whole other side that you're talking about, Aaron, which is there are moments where trauma, soldiers who have been in war and have PTSD, women who've been through sexual assault, different things like that, where we really do have aspects of trauma. And at USA, we're trying to really make sure we're showing a continuum or a spectrum, because it's not all the same. And the interventions vary dramatically. And some can be as easy as talk therapy between peers or with community health workers, or just, there's a lot of different ways. And then there's some that require that very high level. But what the fact is a lot of the one sad thing we found about some terrorists is that they don't all fit a pattern. If you talk to most experts and analysts, surprisingly, there is not a set pattern on all of this. But we do know that there are certain things that will drive someone closer to that. So that grievance, whether it's from security forces or incidents they've lived through, what we call adverse experiences. A lot of those happen in childhood or in adolescence, at a time when the brain is much more susceptible to those scars of that lead to what's called toxic stress. And toxic stress messes up our ability to make good choices. And we have to remember that this isn't rocket science, this is brain science. The first part of the brain that develops in that 14 to 21-year-old age range after we've had the early development is the back of the brain, the reptilian part, which is impulse. And that's why young people
Emotion.
are naturally impulsive. The last part that comes in is the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that makes it like obvious, why should I pick up my towel off the floor every time Casey tells me to pick the towel off the floor? Or why should I do this? It's like the good judgment part. So young people are wired to be more impulsive as the brain develops, but
And
that time period that they're more susceptible. So
men in particular develop
Yes.
it later. So, it can be 25 or 26 years old. So think
Or older.
about that. Yeah. So I mean, a kid in high school is expected to do all of these things when in fact his brain is going absolutely crazy in development, let alone if there's a mental health concern, or I was going to bring up the same thing Mike did, or trauma, right? Specific trauma. If we peel back a lot of these cases for belonging and searching and issues, there could be a trauma piece as well that has not been addressed. And what we do know, just real quick, Jim, what we do know is the longer you wait when there's experienced trauma without an intervention, that it actually affects the brain and the synapses that connect the back to the front. So you can have these young men who don't have the capacity to critically think and rationalize and analyze for their thought, because they have had these traumas or these issues, and they haven't had the ability to have an intervention to grow those and to help those.
Well, I think to Aaron's point, that people will look at situations like the last 2 weeks and others like them, and they'll say, well, these are crazy people. This is not, they will detach themselves from it, which is normal and natural. But in reality, we'll miss the numerous news articles that will come out. They've already come out about these two guys who said, for the most part, these were relatively normal human beings. And I saw one article today about the kid in Colorado Springs, but basically it said that he could get angry. That describes a lot of people I know, and me sometimes. So, I think what we're shocked to discover is that there is a thin line between a young person fantasizing something or thinking about something. What young male in particular hasn't fantasized, I'm just going to wipe them all out. At some point we did when we were kids, something happened but you weren't going to do that. But there's something that causes a jump across the line, and it's something other than just insanity. So
yeah, there's a
the question is, what is it?
Yeah, there's a difference of saying, I'm angry. How is that manifesting? I'm angry because of this is happening. And then am I able to talk about it and think and do something about it? Do I feel that it's going to be resolved, right? Mike talked about drivers. We have push and pull factors, right? Grievances, exclusion, corruption are kind of pushing factors. We have charismatic leadership, narratives, opportunity that kind of pull people into these things, and these narratives can confuse. But I think it's, how does that anger manifest? Does it manifest in that, how you're feeling, the narratives, the people that are around you, to say, I can communicate it and I can do something about it, or do something about it in a positive way to resolve it? Or do I not know, and do I have no other means but to commit violence, because that's the way that I can obtain my revenge, my identity, my meaning, whatever it is. I wanted to say, I talked to Jim earlier, Russell Schultz is a Proud Boy that was interviewed on CNN recently, and what he talked about is patterns of those who joined, in particular, that stood out to me. And he talked about how, these groups that we're seeing now, particularly far right white extremist groups, that it gives them a sense of belonging. They have this inner person that they want to be, but they're afraid to do it, especially alone. And so they generally have never had any close friends. Back them, right? We see it similar in a gang, but it's different in the supremacy groups because they may not buy into all of the ideology piece, but they buy into the belonging piece. The risk of belonging outweighs the risk of something else. They want to belong to something. And so that's why what Mike was talking about, it's individual, because you may be radicalized over a long period of time for an ideology, politically, religious, whatever it is. Or it may just be, it may be radicalized because of an attitude or behavior, something that you want someone to do. It may not
and these are probably, I think these are probably one step at a time for most people. You know, my guess with the Capitol insurrection, the thing that happened to the Capitol is most people who went there didn't intend to commit violence or walk in there. I think some did, obviously, but they belonged to that group. And when some went in, it was participating, it was being a part of it. And so you kind of get drawn in a step at a time, I think, and it can happen on the right or the left or anywhere, I suppose. But at the end of the day, you know, I think this is something that happens for a lot of people, one gradual step at a time.
Yeah, NYPD has a four-step that they outline: a pre-radicalization, self-identification, indoctrination, and then really the action, the radicalization to action piece. And that happens differently for each person, and the timeline is different. For instance, Mike and I can have very similar upbringings, and we could both have radical views, and I could solve some type of creative innovation thing that's going to save the world, and he goes to bomb a tower. Like, you know, those pieces.
It's interesting you chose that instead of the other way around, but okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Mike's going, thanks, man.
Yeah.
But you know, one of the other things that's changed so much in this is over the last 20 years, I mean, the fact that you can isolate yourself into a group that you determine as your dominant identity group, and you just can take each other to a deeper level of convincing that everything else that's said in the world is wrong, except what we say within our little circle here. And that's what's allowed for, I mean, let's be clear, there are now more terrorist fighters in Syria and Iraq than there were 10 years ago. Why? Because it's continued to create an environment where we see people building off their inner circle. The same with the groups in the US. Because you can create your circle on the internet, you don't need to have conversations with people who might have other opinions that you have to then justify yours to. And so I think that's one of the more troubling aspects of what's happening is we've lost the ability to talk about issues across multiple perspectives. I'll give you an example. My daughter and her friend from high school, they were at Marshall High School. They went off to college after some of the incidents that happened 2 years ago with racial problems and with the police. They went to some of the protests downtown. Then they came back and they realized that the neighborhood they grew up in Vienna, had some really troubling aspects to it. And they said, we need to have this conversation here in our neighborhood. The entrance to our neighborhood had Confederate statues, was named after a Confederate general, Stonewall Jackson. And we started conversations in our community. And people were like, oh, why are you doing that? Why are we bringing that up? You know, that's not an issue here. Well, it turns out it was an issue and people hadn't been talking about it and didn't really want to talk about it in some cases. But we went to a church, had the community come together, had people talk about it from all different perspectives, including Stonewall Jackson's great-great-grandson. And we talked about the history of our neighborhood and that it was set up, and in the original deeds, you were not allowed to sell your house to a person of color. And that was in the deed, and it was set up to keep people out. It wasn't because Stonewall Jackson came to Vienna, Virginia. It was set up to keep people out of that neighborhood. And to this day, there were aspects that continued to foment that. And that became a painful dialogue for 2 years in our neighborhood. We finally brought down those statues, and it forced our entire community to kind of reckon with some of this, that it wasn't gone from 50 years ago or 200 years ago. It's still a part. Why did we only have one family out of 300 that was a family that was African-American family, and they moved out? But then because there's another family moved in because they said, this community is trying to work on this issue, and they actually moved in. But and then some biracial families thanked us for having that dialogue in the community because they had been feeling it, even though maybe a lot of the white families had never felt that. And
I
so
was curious.
these are issues that are very alive in our communities of Northern Virginia still. So.
Well, yeah.
So before we move to that, Mike, before we were on, you were saying that if you go to the Southern Poverty Law Center's list, which I've done, you will find quite a few groups in McLean, Vienna, Falls Church.
Open, yeah.
You'll be
Extremist.
surprised.
Yeah.
This is not something that is isolated to somewhere else.
No, for sure not. And so I would love to like just go off of that, because I think one of the reasons why I was struggling with trying to figure out how to frame the topic for this evening is because something that I'm even wrestling with, and we talked about a little bit about this before the show, we were talking about boys and girls and gender-based discussions, is in our society, even now, while we say we're fighting identity-based crime or hatred or racism, we are forming identity groups to fight identity groups. And it's almost like, how are we really, I'm curious from both of you, from all your professional look into this, like, are we going to solve this by creating identity groups? And I went through something recently, and I shared it with quite a few people, but in the work world as a female, when I see a problem where I feel like it's female against female, sexist or harassment, my immediate thought isn't to threaten men. I think men need to be educated just as much. But most of the movement around stopping sexism and sexual harassment has been a very clear threat to men. There haven't been a ton of discussions in a gender-based conversation of how do we come together, and therefore men will automatically freak out if a woman brings up a claim about any kind of gender-based discrimination. And so I found a situation for myself where I was honestly just trying to have an honest conversation, but I get it that there's no good history or precedent set that it's going to be an easy conversation, or not even just easy, because it shouldn't be easy, it should be hard, but one that's not going to be filled with anger and my own in-group identity and my own thinking and my own inability to understand maybe where they're coming from. And so I'm just curious, like, when you're looking at how we're trying to solve this right now with all the messaging that's out there, are we going about it the right way by classifying ourselves in opposition to classifications on some level? We've now identified white men. Like, white men is now a group. So yeah. Great for us. We created a group and trying to fight it.
So I think if you think about the past year, right, the movements, the social justice movements that we had, generally those movements were because there was a feeling that met a threshold and a timing that there was something missing to be able to acknowledge and needed to move forward, right? And that there's a longing to move towards something. And then you think about, after that, the fall, and then in the winter, this rise, at least in most of America, of this right-wing kind of response of, we just want things to be back how they were. There's a sense of back, there's a sense of something being lost. And so there's a natural tension between those two movements. There's a movement and a reaction that we see. So there's automatically going to be this tension between those groups, those types of attitudes and behaviors. And generally, when you talk to people in different demographics, in all kinds of demographics, they just want to be treated the same and among a group to do what they want to do and be heard and be known and be loved, right? When they have to bring up a certain part of their identity in some type of response, then we know that we're missing something, right, from it. But generally, everybody wants to be able to, however they identify, that doesn't stand out in a negative way, right? We're even seeing it on, in response to some of the right wing as well. And we saw a lot of it over the summer, right? As the movement became to violence and other kinds of stuff, right? There was this integration of an organization with a movement kind of thing. I think we're seeing the same thing on the right side. The organization with this narrowing their viewpoints, narrowing their social groups, narrowing their perspectives. We have to challenge ourselves, and we have to challenge other people for that.
Okay, but that's kind of like saying, if you see somebody coughing in the COVID era, stay away from them. Let's back up the bus over your head a step further and think about what kind of communities need to be created, what's been lost, and what kind of communities need to be created to prevent the possibility to vaccinate our culture against this kind of radicalization to begin with. And I take it that the church has a big role here. And I'll tell you, Casey, in case I'm sure you've heard from your wife, but it's getting tougher.
I know.
People are sorting themselves out.
Yeah.
A lot of the issues this year have been race. People won't say their race. Trust me. If I say anything about that, I can guarantee you it's going to be perceived to be some sort of a political statement. I don't think race is political personally at all, and I'm fairly conservative, and I still have strong feelings about justice.
Yeah.
But when even churches are churches are pulling themselves to polls.
Yeah.
People are pulling themselves to polls. What do we do to change this trend, and what do we do as a church? This is a broad question, to make a difference when it comes to creating community that prevents this kind of radicalization. And by the way, radicalization means that we would be preventing a threat against ourselves. But surely there must be some sympathy that we have, or empathy towards people who feel so left out,
Yeah.
that they wind up acting out in ways that I think later they regret too.
Yeah, the military is having the same issue. I led a panel today discussing extremism issues in the military. So it's not just grouping together. It's something we're all dealing with. There is a loneliness issue globally, right? So if we're talking about groups and community, we need to understand, that there is a global loneliness issue. The UK designated a high-level cabinet position for loneliness. That's the title. Japan has created agencies to address loneliness.
I'm going to have to hire a minister of loneliness.
Yeah. So, but just to understand, the breadth of this. So as we think about how we group, how we love and community, how we create that, part of it is understanding the deepness of the issue too.
Yeah. And part, I think on that loneliness, it goes back to our most basic human nature. Like, do we feel loved? Do we feel inadequate? And there's so much in our social media and our internet that every day in our media that tells us we're inadequate. And the only way to find adequate is, how do I get around some people who are going to reinforce me and are like me? And so I think one of the interesting things is, what can we do to reach out to those who have been isolated in one way or another and say, we are a space where you can come and we welcome the diversity here. Let's be honest, Northern Virginia and Falls Church and Vienna, we're not that incredibly diverse. Now I will say, my daughter and son and daughter went to Marshall and there were kids from 93 countries there. I love that fact because they really did interact on a lot of different ways with kids with diversity. But we do as a church want to be that space to call people to come in and say, we're here as a community to share the good and the bad together. I think the other piece of that is, what else can we be doing to kind of talk across other groups in the community? So for example, a friend of mine is a Baha'i, and over the past 2 months in Falls Church, they've been leading this exact same dialogue you're having tonight with young people in Falls Church across Northern Virginia through the Baha'i faith. And I don't know if you know, but the Tahiri Justice Center is based in Falls Church, which does some remarkable work on human rights justice across the United States to people who have been victimized. And so, looking for ways that churches come together from different denominations or different backgrounds to have this same discussion that you're having tonight. And so.
Yeah. I think that also, when you guys are talking about loneliness, it feels very personal to me, as most people know my personal story is my father did take his own life in 2010. And 3 weeks after he did, I remember watching Good Morning America, and they talked about how the age group that he was, men, were the highest propensity for suicide at that time because of the isolation and, life stages changes. But when you're sitting here talking about loneliness and extremism, suicide's a very extreme act. And it's all I could think of in my head was we have a lot of empathy and compassion to reach out to individuals that we might think might harm themselves. But I would assume that type of loneliness, isolation manifests itself in either way, either harm to themselves or harm to someone else.
Sure. Outward or inward. Yeah.
The difference is that often people, as bystanders, don't want to get involved.
Right.
So when we peel back the onion in most of these cases, signs were there.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And people will say either it doesn't surprise me or this person did this. There was some social media in particular, posting these types of things and behaviors and attitudes and on these types of platforms and all of that kind of stuff. But I think we're hitting a threshold now to understand the gravity when we don't get involved, that it's not just about, are you thinking about committing suicide? I care about you and I'm going to help you do this. But also, what is going on with you talking about this hatred towards others or disgruntling about others? What is going on here? Where are you hearing, and being able to decipher if it's something towards a behavior of active violence and not just a personal.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim, you were saying that, if you were to talk about racism and things like that, and we all have to do that work with ourselves to say, in what ways do we have racist tendencies? Yeah. The other one that none of us have mentioned the word to, but is there. So if we're talking about terrorist acts, tell me what percentage of terrorist acts are committed by men versus women. And if you look at the stats, it's like 90,
I'm going to guess it's 90-10.
It's about 98-2.
Wow.
And so then we have to say, well, what's going on in issues of masculinity? How men are trapped in this, what some people call the man box, of a certain path of how we need to behave, how we need to be seen in our achievements, and not willing to have that discussion about what is leading men to feel the need to be violent in an intimate relationship, in a community setting, in a conflict setting. And that's an issue. Again, if we're making progress on certain issues like mental health and opening up and destigmatizing that, here's another issue that nobody likes to talk about, but it's definitely one that needs to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And so.
Yeah, I mean, my fear is fear. Is people's fear responses are leading in the opposite direction of what will remedy this. I know, Casey, this is so serious for you that you sort of committed yourself to student work. Not like you had a lot of extra time, but your feeling was that to be involved with students is critical because they're at a critical juncture. I think we're just going to have to have a lot more people examine themselves and say, am I responding to fear in such a way that this is going to be amplified or multiplied? Rather than to look for a creative solution, and as in our case, as people of faith, to look for a solution that involves love and caring for people, including people. So I just, that's why I'm asking. We're a church, and this is although we don't always talk about religion here, but what is the church's response? I just got to believe that if church has really got serious about connecting in a way to make a difference here, it would make a difference.
Yeah, we know that in the past 15 years or so, as we've addressed globally the issue of gender issues, it's been focused on girls, right?
Yeah.
Rightly so. Getting them into school, getting them access, getting them rights, absolutely. But what we forgot about was boys. So when we talked about gender, it was really with girls. And so boys have been left out. We need to raise good boys so that we don't have to raise defensive girls. And so me having a teenage daughter now is part of the reason that I'm in student ministry as well, is that I can't you know, as a national security guy that thinks of the worst case scenarios all the time, I can't raise my daughter to be defensive all the time. Have a battle buddy, don't do this, don't do that. I need to also put my life towards raising good men that understand to make this world better. One, for their identity and for their belonging in a positive way, so they know their purpose of God to do great things. But we can't do half of it. It has to, inclusion is all demographics, whatever it is, the ugliness of all of it. If somebody has mental health or trauma, a boy, a girl, whatever it is, that we're looking at it as a church, as people, to be able to, to be able to address it.
Yeah.
Like Jesus. You know, I mean,
Well, guys, I mean, thank you guys so much for being with us. We're out of time, but I think maybe Mike, if you'd come back another time, I think we could do this again. And there, the problem is this is a moving stream. We're always going to have something else to talk about, I'm afraid. I wish we didn't. But thank you for the work that both of you are doing in two different places and intersecting in some places, and for helping us think about what the church can do. And it's great to have you here tonight. And so happy spring to all of you. And Aaron, I'll see you soon. 2 weeks off, folks. So next week, the week after, you can get on YouTube, but we won't be here. So in 3 weeks, we will see you. And don't worry, we'll be back. Everybody have a great week. We'll see you next time on Soul Cafe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.